Psalm 77, I want to approach this from a perspective of when things aren't going your way. And it pleases the Lord that, that things don't always go our way. And we hit hard times, and we can certainly have disappointments in our life. Everyone all of the saints in the Old Testament went through difficult times. Paul went through difficult times in the New Testament, feared for his life at times. David had his own son try to take over his kingdom, and he had to flee for his life from his own son, who would have killed him had he caught him. That's tough times. Those are very tough times. And when we face calamities, and sometimes multiple calamities, more than one thing can hit us at one time, and we can feel overwhelmed. Or am I the only one? I don't think I'm the only one. Some of you are a little bit young. Your life has been pretty good. This will be coming down the pike for you. But it's part of life. God uses these things, I do believe, to wean us away from our affection for the world and the things of the world and our grand designs of things, and to keep our eyes focused on more important eternal things, because the things of this world are going to pass away. So I think Psalm 77 is very, very much about these situations. And so I'm going to read I'm going to read it in 3 sets of verses. The first set is a short set about David's situation. The second set is about how he goes into a depression about the way things are going and just can't see his way out of this. He begins to question God, question the Word, question everything. And then the third set is when God lifts his spirits up and causes him to see things aright. But in the Psalm 77, in verse 1, he says, I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and he gave ear unto me. In the day of my trouble I sought the Lord. My sore ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. I can just kind of start there. And so we have the setup where David's crying unto God. And you might notice, just for effect, and kind of get in the mood of the passage, he's saying, I cried unto God, even unto God. It's kind of like, I'm going to God. It says it twice, unto God, just kind of for effect. With my voice, I gave ear unto me. God, you can take away from that, he knows where to go. He understands where to turn in this time of trouble. And he turns unto God, and God will hear when others don't, as you might well imagine, just like Jonah and the whale, calling out to God in this time of very deep distress. He's calling unto God into a time of trouble or deep distress. And in verse 2, he says, I read this on Wednesday night, in the day of my trouble I sought the Lord, and what great advice that is. And that's what he's doing in this day of trouble. He's seeking the Lord. You will always do well, but you might think about that. In the day of his trouble, he didn't seek other things. Well, I'm going to go get a round of golf to clear my head. I'm not going to watch some TV to relieve the pressure, or I'm not going to find some other amusement or some other thing. So in this day of trouble, and it's a lesson for us, he sought the Lord. So when your day of trouble comes, keep that in mind. There are a lot of things, the world would give you a lot of ideas. Do this, do that, do the other thing. In your day of trouble, I encourage you, like David, seek the Lord. In Isaiah 50:10, go ahead and turn there if you would. It's just the next book, not far away. A passage you've probably heard a few times over the years. Where it says, who is among you that fears the Lord, that obeys the voice of his servant, that walks in darkness and has no light? Let him trust in the name of the Lord and stay upon his God. The same situation there, if you will. There's darkness, there's lack of light, but those who fear the Lord obey the voice of his servant. It says, stay upon your God. The same thing David is saying here in Psalm 77, verse 2. In the day of my trouble, when there seemed to be no light, no direction, everything is going wrong. And David had a lot of things go wrong in his life. He sought the Lord. In verse 3, or let me pick up on that. My sore ran in the night and ceased not. Just doing a little digging around on that. I've got some notes there for you on that some would interpret that differently from the words that the effect would be that the word for sore or wound could also be translated hand, and then the other verb could be translated as extended or stretched forth. So what he's basically, another way to interpret that, my sore ran in the night, is his hands were stretched out to God through the night. In other words, he's continuous in prayer. When he's saying, my sore ran in the night, he says, I'm ceasing not to stretch my hands out toward God in this time of my difficulty. So, and he goes on to say, my soul refused to be comforted. I remembered God, was troubled. That's an interesting verse. It says, I remembered God, and I was troubled about that. And you would think that, well, if he remembered God, well, he'd feel so much better and everything would be going well. But he's saying it troubled him when he remembered God. And that could be for a lot of different reasons and for a lot of different effects. But certainly it could be that when he thought upon God in his prayer, he only could think about how his own faults and his own weaknesses, and how that just troubled him, that he was so far from the kind of person that was obedient in all things to the word, obedient in all things to his son. So he could be troubled by his own awareness and sense of his own sin, which is the most likely sense of the passage here. That when we're in a depression and when things are going wrong and we go to God, there are times we just all we see is our own failings, and we see our own failings because that's where his eyes are set. His eyes are set upon his own self. We're going to see that here in a little bit. It's like what he's doing here is he's going deeper in depression, is he's focusing more and more on who he is and what he's done and what his problem is. And all of a sudden, that's going to take him down to the bottom. That's going to take him down to the bottom because there is no hope in what we do. Their hope is in what Christ has done. And when our eyes are turned in the right direction, our spirits are going to lift. But he says, I remembered God, I was troubled, and I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed in his problems. And it's a difficult thing when you're overwhelmed. The problems are coming so fast and furious, or the problem is so deep that it just sinks you down. In verse 4, he goes on to say, let me go ahead and read verses 3 to 9. He remembered God was troubled. I complained. My spirit was overwhelmed. Thou holdest my eyes waking. I am so troubled that I can't speak. I considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. That's kind of a way of saying I try to remember the good times. I commune with my own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. Will the Lord cast off forever? Will he be favorable no more? Is his mercy clean gone forever? Does his promise fail forevermore? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Hath he in anger toward me shut up his tender mercies? Now, I think the key here, obviously he's overwhelmed. He keeps, if you read it as, I'm troubled, I can't speak, I've considered these things. I think about the good times. In verse, you can almost see him getting worse and worse. He calls to remembrance the better times when he's singing those songs in the night where things were going well, and how that might cause his spirit to be lifted, but it doesn't do him any good. He says he communes with his own heart. My spirit made a diligence. So he's inward focused. He's inward focused, and because he's so focused on his complaint, his problem, he says, I've considered the days of old, the ancient times. Days of old meaning, what's happened more recently, and I've thought about over a longer period of time, the ancient times. And then he comes to these questions, just kind of, if you will, navel gazing, what they would call it today, navel gazing. I'm just looking inward to see, where did I get off track? Why are things the way they are? I'm troubled from outside. I'm troubled inside. And he starts to question the very word of God. He questions his relationship to God, and he questions whether God cares about him at all. And I've got a quote in here, and it's kind of an interesting quote. As you know, I kind of like to, if you've ever read John Calvin's Institutes of Religion, you're a better man than me, because it's difficult reading. It's boring. It's tedious. Calvin was a preacher's preacher. By that I mean he taught preachers. And he was very, it's like going to college. He's more of an instructor than he is a preacher. But he was very good with the language, and he more focuses on what the language is saying and what is and isn't being said. And the preachers were there to, that was his role. And I saw some comments that he made about this, and I've got them listed out there for you, I think, because it was very interesting to me, and I think it captures the mood of the psalm. He says, the meaning of the inspired writer simply is that although he thought upon God, his distress of mind was not removed. I was troubled when I thought upon God. It no doubt often happens that the remembrance of God in the time of adversity aggravates the anguish and trouble of the godly, as, for example, when they entertain the thought that he's angry with them. The prophet, however, does not mean that his heart was thrown into new distress and disquietude whenever God was brought to his recollection. He only laments that no consolation proceeded from God to afford him relief. And this is a trial which it is very hard to bear. It's not surprising to see the wicked racked with dreadful mental agony, for since their great object and endeavor is to depart from God, they must suffer the punishment which they deserve on account of their rebellion against him. But when the remembrance of God, from which we seek to draw consolation for mitigating our calamities or making them less, does not afford repose or tranquility to our minds, we are ready to think, and here's the punchline, we're ready to think that he's sporting with us. Okay, we are nevertheless taught from this passage that however much we may experience of fretting, sorrow, and disquiet, we must persevere in calling upon God, even into the midst of all these impediments. I don't know if you've ever got to the point of, God's just messing with me. He's just messing with me. Things are going so wrong that you may not verbalize it, but you will certainly, it'll enter into your mind that this is too hard for me. It's a load beyond my ability to bear. And but he goes to say, but nevertheless, from the psalm, you also see that no, he's going past that. But it enters his mind. Will the Lord cast me off forever? Is there no more favor in God? Am I just stuck in this? Have I been imagining this grace and mercy all along? Is his mercy clean gone? If he says his mercy is clean gone, he knows somewhat of it. If he says, is his mercy clean gone? He says, I knew it before, but it's not here anymore. Where is it? Where is it? Has he forgotten to be gracious? Again, implies, there was a time I understood, and God was merciful to me, and I walked in a blessed way. Things were better. The life was better. There weren't these calamities, and now it's a different time. Now those calamities are here. Now I'm in this tough spot, whatever this tough spot is. Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? He's tending towards work. God's mad at me, therefore he's punishing me. I've done something wrong and God's punishing me. He's got himself in that kind of a funk. That's all you can say about it. And that question he asks, will he be favorable no more? Turn to Psalm 42, if you would. A few things over. In Psalm 42 in verse 5, the psalmist says, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul, and why art thou disquieted in me? Hope." Here you go. Here's the punchline. "Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him for the help of his countenance." So David, or the psalmist in Psalm 77, is at the same place, asking himself the same hard question: why am I cast down? And the same solution is there: hope thou in God. And he's going to turn in Psalm 77, in verse 10, he comes to this conclusion after all this. He's hit rock bottom, where he knows his own weakness. He's so troubled he can't speak, can't see his way out. Tries to remember good times, but the bad times of current are overwhelming the good times of past. And his spirit sags to the point where he wonders, where's God? This God that I once knew, this God that I'm calling upon. He said, I call unto God, even unto God with my voice. And he heard. And he knows he hears, but he is so down. And then in verse 10 he says, and this is the turning point, and I said, this is my infirmity. This is my infirmity. This way that I'm thinking is my problem. The word infirmity there can be translated as this is my sickness, this is my disease. He goes, this is my problem. It actually more often is translated, this is my death. This is continuing on in this way is the way of the unbeliever, to doubt God and to walk away from God. He goes, this is my infirmity, but I'll remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. Now, this is a big turning point here, where he's taken his eyes off of his problems, and he's beginning to turn. He realizes there's no hope in that. There's no good end to that. If I'm going to sit here and look at myself and see my own weaknesses, that's going to take me to the depths of despair and depression, which is where he's heading. But God, by his grace and mercy, pulls his eye around and says, wait a minute, this isn't right. This isn't right. What am I thinking about? Where am I going with this? And he said, this is my infirmity. I'll remember. He says in verse 11, I'll remember the works of the Lord. Surely I'll remember thy wonders of old. I'll meditate also of thy works. Okay, now he's turning away from his stuff, and things are changing in his mind. You'll see, I'll talk of thy doings. Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. I'm going to marvel at that God is so merciful that there's gospel preaching in the church. Who is so great a God as our God? Thou art the God that doest wonders. Thou hast declared thy strength among the people. That gospel goes out. The very strength of God, the very power of God goes out. And here I am underneath that. You've declared that strength among the people. Thou hast with thine own arm redeemed thy people. There's hope. He has done the work. He's provided the sacrifice. He's made it right. He says, the sons of Jacob and Joseph, and Jacob being a trickster and a bum, he goes, you with thine own arm redeemed thy people, including the worst of us. He goes, thy waters saw thee, O God, the waters saw thee, they were afraid. The depths also were troubled. Now, these next 4 verses are interesting, because what it's saying is, God's going to get you through this problem in a way that you have no idea how he's going to do it. He's going to do it his way, and you're not going to understand it at all, but he's going to do it. So follow with these 16 to 20. The waters saw thee, O God, the waters saw thee, they were afraid. The depths were also troubled. The clouds poured out water, the sky sent out a sound, thine arrows went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven, the lightnings lightened the world, the earth trembled and shook. Thy way is in the sea. Try to follow somebody in the sea sometime. This is coming in a direction you'll never know what he's going to do. And thy footsteps are not known. So what he's saying here is, God's going to deliver. God is going to sail me through these stormy seas, and it's going to happen in ways that I can't see, I can't predict it, but it's going to happen because God protects and watches over his people. In verse 20, thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Your protection and your care are there. They're going to be there for your people, the ones you've redeemed. You've done all the work. Now that his attention is focused, all of a sudden he's like, there's a way out of here. There is a way out of here, and God is going to take me that way. And I, by faith, am going to lay hold of that, and I'm going to stop looking at my circumstance, and I'm going to begin to look at God's great mercy. And if you look at the things he's laid out here, he says, I'm going to meditate on his works in verse 12. I'm going to remember the wonders of old. I'm going to reflect on the word. I'm going to reflect on his great work and his truth and his promises. I'm going to talk of his doing. I'm going to talk with the brethren. I'm going to open this up. He says he recognizes that God's ways is in the gospel message that is from the sanctuary. Now, thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. He's saying that gospel preaching comes out of the gospel preaching church. That's where your way is found, and who is so great as a God, as our God, that has, in his great mercy, it's pleased him to bring that gospel message to redeem his people. He goes, in most particular, consider that his declaration of that gospel is the very strength among his people. And he, in fact, is the one who does redeem his people, not they themselves, not their works, not their obedience, not how good they were in the good times, but rather he redeems them on the basis of the work of Christ solely and alone. He is the Redeemer. He will be the deliverer, and he will deliver in his own way and his good time. And if I'm going to sit and look at myself and wonder how I'm going to get out of this mess, or if I'm going to sit and look at myself and say, well, if I've been a better person now, so God should bless me now. How far off the track and how far into depression I'm going to go that way. But by God's grace, may it be that he, when that time is right, shows you, no, that kind of thinking, that's sick. That's not right. That's off the track. That's my infirmity. I've been thinking about my ways. I've been remembering my song. I've been communing with my heart. And I've been navel gazing and looking in my own life and such. And you know what I found there? Darkness, hopelessness, despair. There ain't nothing there. And that's my problem. By the mercy and grace of God, he was delivered in his mind and ultimately in his body from his particular woes. And even at the end of his life, David had to say, I've got a promise from God. It ain't the way it is right now. I wish things were different. But God will make his promise right. I'm certain of it. I'm certain of it. And so it is with every believer. So to wrap it up, in turn to John, well, you don't need to turn there. You know this verse from John 16:33. Jesus said, these things I've spoken unto you that you might have peace. In the world, you're going to have tribulation. It's going to come. It's a guarantee. But he said, be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. So unless you're superhuman, you're going to hit the wall in your day. You're going to come into this time of trouble, and it's going to overwhelm you, and the weight of your own weakness is going to overwhelm you. The circumstance is going to overwhelm you. And at that time of trouble, what do we learn from the song? It's right and good to cry unto God with your voice. It's right and good to seek the Lord and to seek him continuously. And it's right and good that pray that God improve your vision, turn toward his work, return to your rest, his rest. Focus in on his works in verse 12, his wonders, his doings, the fact that he redeems. Redeeming meaning buying back, paying for all that's weak and all that's wrong with you. It's all set aside from God, thrown into the depths of the sea. It's past. He doesn't even know about it. His current concern and his care is solely and totally for his people. And you can rest and hope in that when Christ died, did he die for you? And focus and rest on what's important. Consider and contemplate the mercy that he extends every week in the preaching of the gospel from the sanctuary. And consider that he redeems, defends, protects his people to the very end. For him to deny his people would be to deny himself. Turn to Psalm 116 in closing. 116. It's as if when you begin verse 10 of Psalm 77, where he says, this is my infirmity and everything changes. It's the same in Psalm 116 and verse 7 and 8, it's where the psalmist says, "Return unto thy rest, O my soul, for the Lord has dealt bountifully with thee. For thou hast delivered my soul from death, mine eyes from tears, my feet from falling." So when you're in that middle of that deep problem, and you're overwhelmed, and you see how horribly weak and what a failure you are, if you haven't seen it yet, I've seen it too many times, but I'll see it again. I'm sure of that. Nevertheless, in those times of despair, return to your rest. Return to the Lord. He'll deal bountifully with you. He'll deliver you in ways that you'll never understand or know how. How is he ever going to get you out of this mess? His ways are not known. It'll come from places you don't even understand or see right now. It pleases him to be that way. He's the Lord God of heaven and earth. And it's a beautiful thing.